Welcome to Above and Below, the podcast of the Construction Industry Alliance for Suicide Prevention. My name is Sonya Bohmann, and I am the Executive Director of CIASP. Missing from our conversation today is Zalk Malik, my co-host, but he will be back to join us again soon. However, I do have with me today our special guest, Dr. Elyse Dubb. Elyse, why don't you share with us a little bit about who you are, please?
Great, Sonia. It's wonderful to be here with you. My name is Elyse Dubb, and I am a psychologist in private practice. And I also run a company, Inside Onsite Mental Wellness. And what we do is we work within organizations. A lot of the work I do is within the construction industry, and we help people to have conversations, to get connected, and we help build community by engaging people in conversations about the things that are going on in our minds that are impacting our ability to do our jobs. And I think that it's a real crucial conversation within construction because of the community building aspect and because of the great work that CIASP is doing around building a community of conversation.
Well, thanks for joining us. And you talked about community a bit. Tell us a little bit, what does community mean in the context of the workplace?
So I think community comes in a number of different ways. Within the workplace, it's kind of, I think about it as the what. It's the what that brings us together. A lot of times in community within the workplace, something that we can often lose sight of, I think, is that when we work in a specific industry, say in construction, that we talk there about having some type of common interest.
Mm.
Sometimes even on the most fundamental level, that common interest is from working with our hands,
Okay.
right? So we think about that. So it's based upon some level of that has brought us together in a significant way, to build some pretty awesome things. Okay.
It really does. We often talk about there's so much conversation around construction and how we get into that and how sometimes there is stigma around choosing construction as a career versus choosing to go to college. But the world really doesn't function without construction workers and, as Zalk likes to call them, our construction warriors, right?
Yes.
But in that context, it's hard sometimes to build those communities or to ask for help in those communities. But we also know that having that connection is a reduction of a risk factor, in our industry. So, can you talk a little bit about maybe how we've lost those connections and how we start to build them back up?
That's a great question. And I think that sometimes the focus in construction and in society is about the things that tear us apart. We may think different politically, we may come from different backgrounds. All of these things that tear us apart versus in the work that I'm really doing at Inside Onsite is the things that kind of bond us, the things that bring us together. When we take a step back and we look at our values, right? A lot of times we have shared values. And one of those values I know that we talk about a lot in my work is we talk about stress.
Mm.
We have shared values around stress and how we deal with stress. Stress is not going anywhere, but the question is how we deal with it. And again, there's a lot of the conversation that I talk about. Another piece that I'm seeing talking about more and more that we can have some shared values. Again, regardless of background, regardless of what your job is on the site, shared background around caring for loved ones. That can be family members, that can be our chosen family, whoever it is. We oftentimes have some shared values and have some values around notions around how we balance work and life. I mean, something in my experience that we really just talk about a lot, but we really don't get at in significant ways.
And do those shared values allow us to come together and create like peer to peer relationships or subgroups? Or how do we use those specifically to create community?
When I think about these shared values, I absolutely think it's the way in which we build community because these are conversations that we can all engage with.
Hmm.
And that's where we can each have a voice and how it is we choose to use that voice within these kinds of conversations. And a great example that I gave was a group that I was running recently. And one of the questions that I had, we were 3 or 4 group meetings. And again, I wanted to bring people together, real different backgrounds. We were talking about stress and we were talking about, okay, if you realize you're stressed, you only have 2 minutes, what do you do?
Mm.
And to me, what was fascinating is that people went around, and for those who wanted to share their strategies, we had things people would engage in deep breathing. Other people said, breathing is not for me. Somebody said, I get headphones, I put them on, and I blast heavy metal music. That was an option. Other people said that they would go out and go for a walk. And there we got people talking.
Mhm.
And that was really, really special, and to be on the side of myself facilitating this group, it was powerful. It was powerful to see people who didn't always exercise their voice now finding that voice because it was something we can relate to. It's those shared values, those shared I could say values and also shared experiences too, that just get people talking.
Okay, so here's something that you and I haven't talked about before, but you got my mind going. So, if you were to put on headphones and blast something, what would it be?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, I would have to say it would have to be grunge music from the '90s.
Really?
I would be Foo Fighters and maybe a little bit of Nirvana. How about you?
Okay, so this actually just came up at a conference that I was at because before I go on to speak, no matter where I'm at,
Mm,
I actually listen to Snoop Dogg's Daily Affirmation for Kids. If you
mhm,
haven't tuned into it, it's hysterical, but
mm,
it's this little jingle. It's about 2 minutes long and it's really just a series of affirmations set to music that Snoop Dogg leads. And I'm absolutely obsessed. I listen to it every time I speak.
that's right. And how do you feel that sets you up for the conversations?
No matter what, if I'm anxious, if I'm stressed out, if
Mhm,
I am just feeling like this presentation could go any which way, it just sort of puts my mind at ease. It gets me ready to give my best in that moment. So I love that. I think music has that power to do that or kind of shutting the rest of the world off and having something that you can just focus on for a few minutes, but it is very much a community.
absolutely, absolutely, and I'm glad that you punted that question in an unexpected way because this just goes to show you if you have these conversations and you open up the dialogue, there's going to be somebody else in the community who's like, "Oh, wow, that really resonates with me."
Thank you.
Now, all of a sudden, I may not feel so alone because I also listen to music at full blast, or I also get out and go for a walk, or I also we it's these to me become conversation joiners.
Well, that's so true because I happened to put it on my phone right before we went on. And normally I would stick some headphones in, but some of my co-presenters who I work with a lot on our board were like, "Oh, there she goes again." And then someone else was like, "Hey, wait, what is that?" And it got the
Mhm.
whole room having a discussion before we launched into a pretty heavy conversation about mental health and suicide in that construction context.
Yeah, and, you also bring up a point too that I did wanna talk about when building community, and what my goal for today is to give some pieces that I think are really helpful that can be easily implemented by anybody and don't cost any money. That's always what I'm after.
Yeah, let's do that for sure.
Yeah, and you mentioned this great piece, and that is that piece about curiosity, that you put your headphones in and you do this independently. This is your time. Somebody in your room was curious about that
Mhm.
and they asked you a question. That curiosity is such a builder of community, asking questions. That's the curiosity, asking questions. I'm going to take it a step further, asking the what questions and the how questions. What are you listening to? How do you access Snoop's 2 minute out affirmations? How do you do that? So I think that these are great, great ways in which to engage with others, to bring people into the conversation. And now we start to build community.
That's such a great point because when we're talking about in a presentations, especially in a panel discussion, somebody will often ask what's one thing that someone can do. And we're always saying start the conversation or ask the question. And it can be as simple as how are you doing today? Or
Mm,
are you okay? Or what that looks like.
yeah.
But it really makes a difference because typically you're going to get that I'm fine answer.
Mhm.
But sometimes you get that person who's like, I'm just okay today. And that allows for more conversation in that space.
And more of those what questions and how, like, explain to me a little bit more about what you mean.
Mm.
And one of the things that I try and do, which I find really, really hard to do, is to ask more what questions and less why questions.
Mm.
What is it about today that's challenging? Not why is today a challenging day? And I love what you mentioned about how are you? Sometimes what I like to do, and again, here's some easy things that I think people can start to implement. If you are suspecting that somebody is a little off their game, they're not exactly themselves, how are you? And then you pause for a second or two, and then you add the word really. The word
Oh, I
really.
love that. So, what about that makes the difference?
Because I think that we sometimes will go into we're exchanging pleasantries with somebody. I don't know. You go to the supermarket, you're checking out wherever it is you are, you'd be like, "Oh, hey, how are you?" And the response is, "Oh, I'm good. I'm fine. I'm this." And we give those quick responses. When you're the question asker and you say, "How are you?" Really? It demonstrates that you're leaning into the conversation in a different kind of way. And again, I just think that that pause can carry a lot of weight for somebody. And in some ways, and this is the harder part of what I had just said, is that I think that it can be super, super helpful if there's somebody on your crew, on your team, in your office, and wherever they are, and you're suspecting something's not exactly
Right.
right with them. You see it on their face, you note it in their behavior, you see it in their productivity, in their output, whatever it is. Be mindful of yourself and your own time and ask that question where you have, even if it's just a couple of minutes, to have to listen to what they're
That's
responding.
helpful information for sure. I would also think that sometimes the answer has to do with how much or how comfortable the person feels and how much trust is built. When we're talking about building communities, I think we also have to talk about building trust a bit. Can you lean into that a little bit for us?
Mhm. Absolutely. I think that when we're building trust, the biggest piece of information that I think is helpful is to make yourself available. The trust really gets built with showing up again and again and again. Is that then you establish a pattern that you are somebody reliable, that you are going to ask somebody how they are. And I think that that is really, really the formation of trust in one way. The other part of it too, and I always say with these pieces, start out really small. And that really small is you're sharing a little bit about yourself in response to what somebody says. I'm going to pull from this group because I think it was such a great example is that somebody shared the one who said that they put the headphones on and they blast music. They're like, I take 2 minutes, and he's like, "I have a favorite song by Metallica, and that's what I blast." And I use this example time and again because it was that way to open up that vulnerability and to establish trust. "You are my supervisor, you're feeling this, you do this. Oh, okay, so now you're establishing that presence and you're establishing that sense that I am somebody who also
Makes that common
experience."
denominator, common bond a little bit.
Yes, absolutely.
So, how do we engage though with people that are feeling maybe disconnected or we can't figure out that common bond or maybe someone that's feeling marginalized?
Right. That's a great, great question, and a lot of these don't
Right.
have very simple solutions, even though I'm saying them in very simple kind of ways. Um, and what again, some of the time, these are places to begin and places to start. And I think that it's okay to say, like, "I'd love for you to join in this conversation. What are some ways that I can be helpful to you, where you're seeking advice from the other person. I think that that's a really good way. What has been helpful in the past before for you to be involved in the group? And as we had talked about in a prior conversation too, is getting people engaged. We talked about on a site, sometimes when you're away from family, you're away from home, it could be really easy to grab a six pack and go back to your room by yourself. And we talk too about
Mhm.
the leaders, and the leaders don't necessarily need to be the supervisor. That's an important piece, right? So I think that it's real helpful to offer up as many options as possible to people based upon what people say. A lot of the times, I think with groups who don't feel connected or they feel marginalized, sometimes nobody has ever asked.
Very good point. Yeah. Yeah.
And that came up with a client of mine recently, is that I started asking questions and somebody looked to me and said, "Nobody's ever asked me this before. What are your thoughts about what has happened on other sites that have been successful in bringing people together?" And sometimes, as we've talked about, these can be groups where we talk about how do you connect with your family when you're on a site? That's a pretty intimate one. It can be maybe we're sharing verses that we read in the Bible. Maybe it is we're talking about running. Maybe we're talking about Metallica. Maybe yeah, I can go on and on about different things, and it's about really I almost refer to it as crowdsourcing, asking other people and then building opportunities for people to engage with one another based upon those
Do you think that
commonalities.
people struggle sometimes starting that conversation because they're afraid to ask the wrong question, especially when we're with different people from different backgrounds and different, maybe even religions or cultural backgrounds? Like, how do you break through some of those barriers?
Again, I think it starts by asking them and asking what has been successful in the past, and some of the time, again, I go back to some of those pieces that feel, on the surface at least, that
Right.
they bond us. And, music, again, going back to the earlier part of our conversation, can be a great one too. And you start with those places that feel like they can be good places where people can engage in conversations. And sometimes they're conversations about recipes that people make. Sometimes they're conversations about
Right.
what's your favorite food. Sometimes it's conversation. It can really be anything. I always talk about this in a way is that we start small and get people to share a little bit about themselves. So I think that it's, again, easier said than done, but let's try a whole bunch of things. And again, start asking as much as
And
you
giving a
can.
little bit, right? You have to engage in your own vulnerability so that people recognize there's that helps build that trust. But how do we maintain that vulnerability, but also the psychological safety that goes with it?
Right, and I think that that's a really, really challenging question, and with psychological safety, I talk about it as that's the place where we can talk about making mistakes and the mistakes being okay. That's really what psychological safety is on the surface, and I think in part, in order to get those conversations going, sometimes those leaders, again, the leaders on paper and then the real leaders who are actually the ones who are probably a little bit more comfortable leaning into their vulnerability, they start to talk a little bit. And then what really starts to happen, I see, is that people start to build a common language. Oh my gosh, there was that time that I did this. Oh my gosh, I
Mhm.
really did that too. And sometimes it can just be a consensus. Sometimes it's starting out too when someone says something and you nod your head.
Right.
You don't even need to say anything. You nod your head in that way in which you've acknowledged what the other person has said and you're recognizing your own vulnerability as well. So I think that there are those pieces that come and sometimes we have the expectation that you have to speak up. That may not be the starting point for somebody, a recognition of the other person. That's a starting point, and that is really, really significant. And knowing too that everybody's working on their own timeline regarding what that vulnerability
Right.
looks
Now, is
like.
that where the concept of holding space sort of fits into the conversation where there's that bravery in just being?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely, and I think that sometimes I think about that and I frame it around this whole idea of how is it that we can be our best selves, right? There's like I know a lot of talk and a lot of discussion around being authentic and then being our best selves, and that holding space gives people the respect and gives people a sense of understanding that it may take time for you to be able to occupy that space in a different way. But you know what? I'm going to show up here. I'm going to offer this again and again and again. And sometimes I feel that I may have shared this with you offline. One of my proudest experiences working with Inside Onsite was I was running a group within an organization, and I had somebody in the group who said nothing. That person showed up every single time for the group, and about 6 sessions in, she started speaking, and that's what it took. We were all holding space, not necessarily for her. I know I was aware of it, and she was in a group where she definitely, as she shared with me privately, felt a little bit more marginalized. It was not people from a similar background, and it took her that time to be at a place where she felt comfortable to
Mhm.
occupy the space, and it's recognizing that we are all on a different path with that.
That's awesome, and I love that there is that need sometimes to support that
Mhm.
identity development almost within the community and being able to hold space when necessary and engage with when necessary. As we're kind of drawing close to our time here, we have created a bit of a community at CIASP, and one of the things that we do with that is we think about what our word of the year would be, or what word has either influenced us throughout the year, or we would like to have influence us in the following year. So I will ask you what we ask all of our guests, and I will say, what is your word of the year?
Ah, um this is definitely a challenging question for me. In years past, I think I have stayed with the same word, and that is flexibility.
Okay.
And this year, I think that I'm going to expand upon that word, and I'm going to talk about it more in terms of perseverance.
Okay. Awesome. So Zolk would tell you if he is here that his word is
Mhm.
gratitude. And I bring that up because we are grateful that you joined us today. And my word is intentionality. And we have been very intentional in the conversations that we choose to have on this podcast. And the one of the reasons that we asked you to join us. But I also know that we've had a lot of scheduling challenges in this. So thank you for your flexibility
Thank you. This is great.
and teaching us some perseverance, obviously, because it is important that we continue to go back to the places that we know that we can make a difference and help create community. So thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Sonia, and thank you for making a difference. I love the work that you're doing at CIASP, and I feel tremendous gratitude for being part of this undertaking to really make a difference in the world of construction in particular. So thank you.
Thank you. And listeners, be safe, and we will talk to you again soon.